Welcome to this conference, and welcome particularly to those of you that have had long journeys to get here today. For those of you from Manchester, I think you probably share my view that it's a refreshing change not having to trek down to London for a conference, but having it a little bit closer to home. We work for a company that's enormously profitable. Last year it announced record profits, more than double the previous year, and yet it still announced a pay freeze, closure of a pension scheme to existing staff, which amounts to the equivalent of a 20% pay cut, and 1,200 job losses. Like so many other companies trying to take advantage of the recession to push through cuts, to shift wealth from the people who make the wealth to the shareholders on a permanent basis. We've now had 9 days of strikes over jobs and pay and pensions, and the solidarity we have received from across the movement has been absolutely magnificent. Without that, there is no way that our members would have had the confidence to put up the fight they're doing. And already we've won a great deal. The job losses in total have been reduced to less than 900 from over 1,200. Most of those job losses have changed from being compulsory to voluntary. The job losses have been delayed. We've got an extra year in the pension scheme and an offer of a 5% pay rise for 3,000 or 4,000 people in that pension scheme. On Monday the 8th, we're planning rallies around the country in London, Birmingham, Manchester and Belfast, and we'd like to work with other people to build those and get support for them to show what this movement can deliver.
The cleaners on the underground and all over Britain have been, exploited because of the hostile immigration laws. As migrant workers, there are some group of workers that have, tend to be undocumented. And so the cleaning bosses, they capitalize on this and use this to exploit the cleaners. For several years, there was, relentless campaign for the London living wage for cleaners and better conditions of employment. With the help of some activists in RMT and the national executive of the RMT, the cleaners on the underground, through industrial action, got the London living wage in September 2007. Sadly enough, most of our activists were systematically and calculatively victimized by their immigration status. And so we lost some very good activists. A defeat to one section of workers is a defeat to all, and we must resist it.
Figures yesterday came out about the increase in suicides among ordinary people right across the UK. An increase in suicides last year for the first time in a decade. And that suicide increase has followed exactly the trajectory of the recession itself. Again, statistics yesterday came out showing an enormous increase in unemployment right across Europe. And who's that hitting hardest? It's between 18 and 25-year-olds. That also is reflected in the media, where people trying to get into jobs in journalism find it harder and harder to do that because they're expected essentially to work for nothing. People are expected to do work placements as part of their experience, and they're being told they have to come in and work for a pittance, maybe for expenses if they're lucky. It makes it harder and harder for working class people to get into journalism, to get into jobs in the media, and that has an effect on the kind of coverage that people get in their newspapers if people are entirely coming from middle class or wealthy backgrounds. The general message from the NUJ is that the employers should be cutting hours, not jobs. They should be cutting their profits, not our pay.
Any week when you hear an announcement that people like Adam Crozier are leaving the public service, it's bound to be, as far as I'm concerned, a really good week. I have to say this. But I have to qualify this, but if there's anyone in this room who works for ITV, then you are really in for a terrible tough time. But there's a real important message here, because you see, the guy who's given Adam Crozier his new job at ITV, a guy called Archie Norman, is a mate of Alan Leighton's, who also give, Archie Norman also give Alan Leighton a job, as does Stroke Walmart as a non-executive director. And what we're seeing here now is a concentration, not just of the political elite, but the corporate elite in this country, whose whole ethos is to slash and burn and attack workers' conditions just so as we can grow profit and grow what's commonly known as the only measure of the benefits or wealth of a society, which is gross domestic product. For the world economy to stand still, average GDP across the world has to grow by 3%. What that means is is a race to exploit the planet's resources and to fuel rampant consumerism. At the same time as those measures increase, the real measures of people's role in society, the people we associate with, people's welfare and people's happiness gets worse, hence the suicide rate that Peter talked about. What we're going to see is the biggest concerted attack on a working class that we have ever seen. There's nobody now of mainstream politicians saying anything other than there will be cuts, they will be deep, which is why the campaign that the CW has been part of, and other unions in this room, for 1 million green jobs, and I know there's a workshop, is exactly what's needed. Even Alistair Darling himself says that, you know, there's the potential for 500,000, if you like, green jobs in this country. But there's another point about this, and it's why they have to be government jobs. They have to be in the areas that they needed. In energy, expensive energy that's not going to last forever. An integrated public transport system, a housing system that is energy efficient and houses the homeless and houses the needy in this society is what's needed now. Because the United Against Fascism and Anti-Fascist groups match up to the BNP and English Defence League, the NPC needs to be standing next to them. And when the NPC calls its rally on the 10th of April in defence of welfare services, Stop the War needs to be standing next to them. And when Stop the War organised for troops out, the National Union of Students needs to be standing next to them. Because when the National Union of Students are fighting cuts in education, then the trade union movement needs to be standing next to them, when the trade union movement is doing what it can to defend jobs. Because what they will try and do is pick off each one of those groups one by one, which is why we need to build a coalition across all those groups and defend each other's interests in the interests of the working class and the people of this country, and not the political elite.
The university I'm from in Sussex, we kind of started the year with the reassurance that nothing was going to happen, that there would be no cuts at Sussex, that Sussex was fine, and then 2 weeks before the end of term, 115 compulsory job cuts were announced. A week later, we had 500 students and a couple of staff members storming the Senate meeting where this was being publicly and officially announced, screaming strike, strike, strike. A march is being organised by all the unions and the students together, and this kind of atmosphere is really building, and you can see that cuts are bringing everyone together, but it's also allowing us to build links between the different struggles.
We work for a company that was making millions and millions of pounds profit, never losing a penny. Vestas was one of the bigger employers on the island that paid a decent wage, or a reasonable wage. There aren't many on the island. So it was a shock when they came in and told us that was it. We were all losing our jobs. We decided to make a stand and we took over the factory. The occupation lasted for 18 days before the bailiffs come in and evicted us, but we carried on the campaign afterwards as well, and the campaign is still going on now. We asked the government to nationalise it, and they refused. Their answer was, why should they want to own a wind turbine company? Everyone who starts joining Vestas again, because they are going to take on people again, they're building a brand new facility, which they're getting millions of pounds worth of grants for. It's something like 80 million they've got from CEDA and from the government. So I'm building a new place, and it's literally less than a mile up the road, where they're going to just start employing people again to build blades. We're going to stand outside the factory and recruit people into the union, advise as many people as possible to join the unions, so this doesn't happen again. And that's the only way things are going to change, if people start standing together and standing up for each other.
I'm a community worker and I work with parents who have children who are on the autistic spectrum. The centre where they meet is threatened and is probably going to be shutting at the end of March. The group also were going to be applying for a grant, but the council have decided to cut grants to the voluntary sector and to community groups as well. So a double whammy. In addition to that, they sometimes get welfare rights information to help them know about benefits. Those workers are getting cut as well, and also the work that I do, we're getting cut in half. There's only 25 of us now in Glasgow, just the 200 community workers, and we're getting cut in half as well. It's absolutely shocking. I think probably we need to start thinking about occupations as well and take a wee bit of a leaf out of our welfare.